Hey guys, welcome to the Stand Up Review podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're reviewing Theo 2016 special No Offence. Let's get into it. This podcast is brought to you by our patrons. If you want to help support the podcast, then head on over to patreon.com/standupreview. With tiers starting at as little as £1, there are some great benefits, such as voting for which specials you want reviewed, Q&As, bloopers, early access to podcasts, exclusive podcasts, and many more. Sign up at patreon.com/standupreview, and thank you for your support. Starting off with a little bit of background on Theo, he's done various TV work, he hosts a few different podcasts, he's also had a half hour on Comedy Central before this, and he went somewhat viral when he popularised crank texting, but this is his first fully fledged stand-up special. I have seen it once before and I really enjoyed it then. And in terms of his style, there's a lot of storytelling and observational comedy. He's also quite bizarre and gets quite close to being an absurdist at times. But with all that out of the way, let's get into the show itself. At the opening of the show, Theo gives a little bit of an intro to get the crowd hyped up. He talks a little bit about New Orleans, which is where the special is being filmed. And there are some good jokes to warm up. He also tells some shorter jokes about his family. There's a little bit of an introduction, but it's not too long. In the first major bit, he talks about child molesters, and this bit's really funny. His style kind of means that you can't really take offence to anything he's saying. He's got that kind of personality where nothing is serious, and you just kind of immediately like him, and the jokes themselves are really well told. He then goes on to talk about his dad, and they're real quick-fire jokes, but the way he does it is really good. He kind of tells a story, but it's just joke after joke, and there's not like an actual story there, but with the jokes you can make out a story with the order he tells them in. It's a really well written show. He goes on to talk about his love-hate relationship with Denny's. There are some potentially controversial comments, but he'll immediately make such a stupid joke or something, a really silly joke, to the point that you can't really be offended with it, because he's kind of saying something that could be serious and then something that's so ridiculous. And again, his style also makes it quite difficult to be offended at anything he's saying. In the next bit, he talks about getting women, and there are some really funny quickfire jokes. His personality really comes through as he's telling them, and it just feels like he's talking to some friends and he's just having fun. And another thing I notice here, he's really good at pointing jokes in one direction and then taking them in a completely different direction to what you would ever expect. This goes on throughout the show, and it's something he does really well. Afterwards, he talks about relaxing, and he kind of talks through a few different ways that people have suggested he relaxes, and he's got some really creative interpretations of different things. He also goes into a lot of depth on yoga and goes on a bit of a rant about why he hates yoga. It's a really funny bit. He then changes tone completely and talks about farting, and this is really silly, almost like childish humour. But it works really well. He catches you off guard with some really good jokes in amongst all the silliness. But it's a little bit of a change from his usual style, but it doesn't hurt the show at all. He goes on to talk about Mississippi, and he just goes off on how shit Mississippi is, and then says, no offence if you're from Mississippi, which is something he does a few times throughout the show, and it's really good. It sort of creates a little funny moment, but the bit all leading up to it is also really funny. Talks about dating, and there are a couple of really great bait and switches. He'll spend a little bit of time building it up and telling it in a certain way before hitting you with a punchline in a completely separate way that you're not even thinking of. It's really, really well done, really well performed. After that, he talks about gay people, and he really shows some diversity here. He starts off by stringing some really good jokes together to tell a story on their own without really having to tell the story. But then he also tells a couple of stories that are just funny on their own and don't really have any jokes coming off them. And it shows that he's got really good range and he's able to perform in a lot of different ways. In the next bit, he talks about meeting Brad Pitt, and it's a really well told story. He mixes in some jokes to really add humour to the story, but it's kind of a funny enough story in itself. This is quite a long bit, but it doesn't get boring at any point or feel like it's going on for too long. And it never goes for very long without there being a laugh or without there being a really great joke mixed into it. And it's a really good example of how to tell a longer story. He then changes it up and talks about a blind date he went on, and he makes some really good jokes. The story itself isn't that great, but he more uses it as a way to link different groups of jokes together than actually trying to be a funny story in of itself. He also goes off on a couple of tangents in this bit with some funnier stories. This is maybe a little bit longer than it needs to be, but you never really go a long time without a laugh, so he doesn't lose your attention at any point. But I think he could probably have made it a little bit shorter, but it's not really a problem. He kind of links this into talking about women's rights. He makes some jokes about how women are doing more and more in society, but it doesn't get offensive at any point. It's very obvious that he's just making jokes. And he compares it to the past in a very playful way. He also links this bit into talking about himself getting older, makes some really bizarre and creative jokes, but it's really well done. The whole show and his whole way of telling jokes, and I guess the way his mind works, is so bizarre and creative that you really don't even know how he's thought of some of the jokes. It's so well done. After that, he talks about kids quite generally, and there are some short, quick-fire jokes. Within this bit, he makes a fairly serious point, but with his style and delivery, it means that there's no change in tone. And it's delivered in a way where it's just a series of jokes that hint at a more serious point. And I don't know if he was actually trying to get that point across or it just happened through the jokes. But either way, it works really well and you don't feel like he's trying to make a point within the bit. This then brings us to the end of the show where he goes through a whole range of topics with some quick-fire jokes. All of them are really, really good and told in a way where it's light-hearted, kind of in a rant style. He then kind of uses that to end the show. It's a fairly abrupt ending, but it's good and it's not necessarily a joke to end on. But it really works well with the bit that came before it, and it's, as I said, it's not necessarily funny, but it really works within the show and it's written in a way where it doesn't really have to be funny, but it makes perfect sense as a way to end the show. Few extra things to mention. In terms of transitions, they're pretty much just blunt cuts between bits. There's a little bit of an awkward transition at times, but nothing bad. And it's usually better to just jump from one bit to the other, rather than try and force something that would come across even more awkward. In terms of his stage persona, he's so relaxed and confident on stage. It seems like he's just having fun most of the time. He's got that kind of southern charm and he talks in a way where he seems really sweet, even when he's talking about things that could be quite controversial. As for the audience, there are 2 pieces of audience participation. Both times the audience doesn't really give him a lot to work with, but he plays off it really well and still gets a joke out of it. And it's not that they don't respond, it's just probably not the kind of answer he was looking for. But he does really well and kind of ridicules the audience member, but not in a mean way, it's all very playful. But both bits really go down quite well. Some overall thoughts to end up on. This is a really, really great show. At times, Theo is so absurd and you're laughing at the joke itself, but you're also laughing at how he even came up with it. He tells jokes in such a unique and unusual way that even if the joke wasn't funny, you'd probably still be laughing just at the concept of the premise. But he also does a great job of actually making the jokes themselves funny. It's kind of hard to explain without watching the show for yourself, but his style is a kind of humour on its own. The first time I watched this, I really thought he was the kind of guy that you either loved or hated, but after rewatching it, I think it'd be quite difficult to dislike him, or at least to dislike the special. Having watched it a second time, it really is a lot better than I remember it being the first time, and I really liked it the first time. I would 100% recommend you go and watch this special. It's become one of my favourite comedy shows, and for that reason, I have to give it a 9 out of 10. Thanks for listening to the Stand Up Review podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to subscribe to get new episodes as soon as they come out every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Check out our Patreon for some awesome benefits at patreon.com/standupreview. If you have any thoughts or suggestions for the show, whether it be a new segment or a show you'd like us to review, let us know on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter at Stand Up Review and give us a follow while you're over there. Feel free to share this or any of our other podcasts on any social media platform. Have a great day and we'll see you for the next episode.